Canada's role in the Afghanistan War began in late 2001. Canada sent its first element of Canadian soldiers secretly in October 2001 from Joint Task Force 2, and the first contingents of regular Canadian troops arrived in Afghanistan in January to February 2002. Canada took on a larger role starting in 2006. After the Canadian troops were redeployed to Kandahar province, there were 2,500 Canadian Forces personnel in Afghanistan and 1,200 comprised the Combat Battle Group. At the 2012 NATO summit in Chicago, Prime Minister Stephen Harper announced that an undisclosed number of Canadian soldiers would remain in the country to help train and mentor the Afghan National Army until the 12th of March 2014. In September 2001, after the 11th of September terrorist attacks, Minister of National Defense Art Egerton advised Governor-General Adrienne Clarkson to authorize more than 100 Canadian Forces members serving on military exchange programs in the United States and other countries to participate in U.S. operations in Afghanistan. Egerton summed up to the dominant thinking in the government at the time when he said, "Any Canadian military deployment to Afghanistan may well be similar to a situation in Eritrea and Ethiopia where we went in on the first wave. We helped establish the stabilization, the basis for ongoing peace support operations that would come after, but then turned it over to somebody else." The operations were aimed at identifying and neutralizing al-Qaeda members in that country, as well as toppling the Taliban regime, which was supporting international terrorism. Canadian experience in nation-building and sector reform. In order to understand Canada's policy in Afghanistan, a brief history of its foreign policy initiatives is in order. In post-Cold War conflicts, Canada experienced a steep, and at times bloody, learning curve as it tried to develop new techniques to contain violence and restore functioning civil societies. Quote, "After a 15-hour firefight in Croatia involving Canadian troops at a ground known as the Medic Pocket, it became clear that peacekeeping forces had to be able to make that rapid tactical transition. It meant that they had to be trained, equipped, and prepared for combat just as much as they were for peacekeeping." Quote, "This is reflected in the training and professionalism of the Canadian Army mentioned later on the page. Moving to Bosnia, Somalia, and Haiti, a new peacekeeping partnership began to form. This required the assistance of soldiers and development organizations working hand in hand to achieve their rebuilding goals. These peacekeeping initiatives carried out by Canadians and other NATO troops in Bosnia and elsewhere in the post-Cold War conflicts are similar and relevant to what they are carrying out in Afghanistan. In many respects, the peace-building in Kandahar is just one more example of the new normal. 2001-2002 Initial deployment. General Ray Hunno, the Chief of the Defense Staff, issued preliminary orders to several CF units. As Operation Apollo was established, the Canadian commitment was originally planned to last to October 2003. Approximately 40 Joint Task Force 2 assaulters were sent to southern Afghanistan in early December 2001. Although the Canadian public was not informed of the deployment, following the American declaration of a war on terror. However, in Sean M. Maloney's book Enduring the Freedom, it was reported that JTF-2 was secretly deployed without Prime Minister John Chrétien's permission in early October 2001. Regular forces arrived in Kandahar during January to February 2002. In March 2002, 3 Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry snipers fought alongside U.S. Army units during Operation Anaconda. In the operation, the team broke, and re-broke, the kill record for a long-distance sniper kill set in the Vietnam War by a U.S. Marine Staff Sergeant Carlos Hathcock. Operation Anaconda was also the first time since the Korean War that Canadian soldiers relieved American soldiers in a combat situation. Canadian forces also undertook Operation Harpoon in the Sharikot Valley. Other forces in the country provided garrison and security troops. The Tarnac Farm incident occurred on 18 April 2002, when an American F-16 jet dropped a laser-guided bomb on a group of soldiers from 3rd Battalion PPCLI Battle Group. The soldiers were conducting nighttime training on a designated live-fire range, and the American pilots mistook their gunfire for a Taliban insurgent attack. 4 Canadians were killed and 8 were wounded in the friendly fire incident. Their deaths were the first Canadian deaths in Afghanistan, and the first in a combat zone since the Korean War. 2003 to 2005, Operation Athena. In August 2003, the Canadian forces moved to the northern city of Kabul, where it became the commanding nation of the newly formed International Security Assistance Force. Canada dubbed this Operation Athena, and a 1,900-strong Canadian task force provided assistance to civilian infrastructure such as well digging and repair of local buildings. In March 2004, Canada committed $250 million in aid to Afghanistan, and $5 million to support the 2004 Afghan election. On 13 February 2005, Defense Minister Bill Graham announced Canada was doubling the number of troops in Afghanistan by the coming summer, from 600 troops in Kabul to 1,200. In spring 2005, it was announced that the Canadian forces would move back to the volatile Kandahar province as the U.S. forces handed command to the Canadians in the region. Operation Athena ended in December 2005, and the fulfillment of the stated aim of rebuilding the democratic process in Afghanistan. Mission-specific training. Mission-specific training has been part of a Canadian soldier's preparation for service on peacekeeping and stability operations since the 1960s. This plays a huge part in the war in Afghanistan. In preparations, soldiers needed to know as much as possible about local customs, culture, and politics, and about the nature and motivation of groups that might oppose the establishment of peace and order. Quote, "This accompanied with psychological triaging with the soldiers' family made this deployment of Canadian forces the most ever prepared overseas. In training for the mission, the goal in Afghanistan was clear. The Afghan mission would only succeed when the government of Afghanistan could provide for the needs of its people." Quote, "It was this notion that shaped the Canadian and NATO approach toward reconstructing the Afghan society." 2006 renewed commitments. Operation Archer. Operation Archer followed Athena beginning in February 2006. Unlike the ISAF-led Athena, Archer was part of the American military command. By the spring of 2006, Canada had a major role in southern Afghanistan, with Task Force Afghanistan being a battle group of 2,300 soldiers based at Kandahar. Canada also commanded the Multinational Brigade for Command South, a main military force in the region. In May 2006, the Canadian government extended Canadian military commitments to Afghanistan by 2 years, replacing earlier plans to withdraw soldiers in 2006. On 28 February 2006, control of Regional Command South was transferred from U.S. Lieutenant General Carl Eikenberry to Canadian Brigadier General David Fraser in a ceremony at Kandahar Airfield. Additionally, Foreign Affairs Canada stated that the commitment was more than just military, employing a whole-of-government approach, in which a provincial reconstruction team, utilizing personnel from the military, foreign affairs, the Canadian International Development Agency and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, would provide a dual role of security as well as reconstruction of the country and political structure. On 31 July 2006, the NATO-led International Security Assistance Force assumed command of the south of the country, and the Canadian task force was transferred from the jurisdiction of Archer back to Athena. 2006 to 2009, Taliban Resurgence. When the Canadian forces returned to Kandahar after being deployed to Kabul in 2003, the Taliban began a major offensive, and the Canadians were caught in the middle. After a spring in which a record number of attacks against Canadian soldiers had been set, which included 6 deaths to the CF, the Taliban in Kandahar and Helmand provinces were massing. Operation Mountain Thrust was launched in the beginning of the summer in 2006. Canadians of the 1PPCLI battle group were one of the leading combatants and the first fighting when the Battle of Panjwai took place. Complex mud-walled compounds made the rural Panjwai district take on an almost urban style of fighting in some places. Daily firefights, artillery bombardments, and Allied airstrikes turned the tides of the battle in favor of the Canadians. After Operation Mountain Thrust came to an end, Taliban fighters flooded back into the Panjwai district in numbers that had not been seen yet in a single area in the post-Anaconda War. The Canadian forces came under NATO command at the end of July, and the 1RCR battle group replaced the PPCLI. Canadians launched Operation Medusa in September in an attempt to clear the areas of Taliban fighters from Panjwai once and for all. The fighting of Operation Medusa led the way to the second, and most fierce Battle of Panjwai, in which daily gun battles, ambushes, and mortar and rocket attacks were targeting the Canadian troops. The Taliban had massed with an estimated 1,500 to 2,000 fighters. The Taliban were reluctant to give up to the area, and after being surrounded by the Canadian forces, they dug in and fought a more conventional-style battle. After weeks of fighting, the Taliban had been cleared from the Panjwai area and Canadian reconstruction efforts in the area began. On 15 September 2006, the Canadian government committed a squadron of Leopard C-2 tanks from Lord Strathcona's Horse, and an additional 200 to 500 troops to Afghanistan. On 1 November 2006, Dutch Major General Ton van Loon succeeded Brigadier General David Fraser as head of NATO Regional Command South in Afghanistan, a post which he will retain for a 6-month period. On 15 December 2006, the Canadians launched Operation Falcon Summit into Tujeri district, to the north of Panjwai. The operation was the Canadian involvement in the NATO-led Operation Mountain Fury. During Operation Falcon Summit, the Canadians gained control of several key villages and towns that were former Taliban havens, such as Hauz-e-Madad. During the first week of the operation, massive Canadian artillery and tank barrages were carried out in a successful attempt to clear pockets of Taliban resistance. The operation concluded with plans to build a new road linking Panjwai with Kandahar's Highway 1 that runs east-west through Tujeri. In February 2007, the 2RCR battle group took over to carry on with combat operations in several districts in Kandahar province. From 15 July 2007 to February 2008, units from CFB Valcartier near Quebec City served in Kandahar, filling most positions in the operational mentoring and liaison team and providing the protective company for the provincial reconstruction team. the 3rd Battalion Royal 22e Regiment Battle Group, with supporting troops from 5 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group and a composite tank squadron from Lord Strathcona's Horse, conducted operations on the ground. This rotation reflected a change in Canadian tactics, with emphasis on systematically clearing holding building in the districts of Panjwai and Jeri, while also protecting Arghandab district and the Afghan-Pakistan border in the area of Spin Boldak. The focus was on intimately working with the Afghan army, police and civil administration to hold cleared areas rather than subsequently lose them to returning Taliban, as had previously occurred throughout the south and east. In February 2008, the Vandu's contingent was replaced by force centered on a PPCLI battle group. Also in February 2008, Canadian Major General Mark Lessard took command of Regional Command South for a 9-month period. On 13 March 2008, the Harper Conservative government's motion to extend the military mission past February 2009 into 2011 was approved in a parliamentary vote with the support of the Liberal opposition. The extension of almost another 3 years is to have a focus on reconstruction and training of Afghan troops, and sets a firm pull-out date, calling for Canadian troops to leave Afghanistan by December 2011. While the Liberals voted in favour of the Conservatives' confidence motion, the New Democratic Party and the Bloc QUE Acute BE Acute COIs voted against it, having consistently rejected any extension of the military mission. NDP leader Jack Layton said, "There are millions of Canadians who don't want this strategy to continue. The population prefers a road to peace." As part of the new American administration's policy on Afghanistan, it was announced that 17,000 new U.S. troops would be deployed to the country, with a third stationed in Kandahar province. On 10 August 2009, Brig Gen. Jonathan Vance of Task Force Kandahar transferred authority of some of Kandahar province to Col. Harry Tunnell IV, commander of the U.S. Army's 5th Stryker Brigade. Canadian troops were then stationed primarily around Kandahar city and the surrounding districts. 2010-2011, American troops urge an end of combat mission. On 1 December 2009, U.S. President Obama announced a major troop increase that would send another 30,000 troops to Afghanistan. The Canadian troops remained mostly active in the Panjwai and Kandahar districts, where they were located at the end of 2009. Canadians were also active in the Jeri and Damon districts. In February 2010, Canadian Air Forces and ground troops from 3 PPCLI took part in the highly publicized Marja offensive. In late June 2010, control of the Jeri and Arghandab districts were transferred to the United States 101st Airborne Division. 2 weeks later, Canadian forces transferred of Kandahar city to the Americans. As of this point, most of Canada's forces were in the Panjwai district as well as Dand and Damon. On 27 November 2010, in the 10th and final troop rotation, the 1st Battalion of the Royal 22e Regiment took over, marking the final rotation before Canada's withdrawal from Afghanistan. Canada withdrew the bulk of its troops from Afghanistan in 2011, with the infantry battle group withdrawn by the end of July, and all Canadian Forces personnel and equipment withdrawn from Kandahar by the end of December 2011. In September 2008, Conservative leader Stephen Harper pledged this, saying a decade at war is enough. After having extended the withdrawal deadline twice already, he acknowledged that neither the Canadian public nor the troops themselves had any appetite to stay longer in the war, and said that only a small group of advisors might remain. 2012 to 2014, NATO training mission and withdrawal. On 9 December 2010, it was announced that after the end of combat operations in July 2011, Canadian forces will be posted to the NATO training mission Afghanistan to continue the training of the Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police. Canada's contribution to this mission was dubbed Operation Attention and took place mostly around Kabul, with some training occurring at Mazar-i-Sharif. By late 2013, Canada began withdrawing its final soldiers from the training mission. In October, the force was down to 650 personnel from over 800, and the withdrawal from Afghanistan is scheduled to be completed by March 2014. On 12 March, the government announced with little fanfare that the mission was formally completed with a flag-lowering ceremony held in Kabul. The last 84 soldiers left Afghanistan on 15 March 2014, ending Canada's 12-year military presence in the country.